Well, this has been rather otherworldly to sit and watch this. It's like you've entered a parallel universe. I mean, how this case is going forward, I just cannot explain. You had a disbarred, convicted serial perjurer on the stand, matter-of-factly detailing how he stole tens of thousands of dollars from his client. And what is really funny is then the prosecutor gets up and says, I just want you to tell the jury, once again, you're not charged with anything, right? And I wanted to stand up and say, yeah, but you should have. He just admitted that he committed grand larceny. He told you that, and you instead decided he was more valuable to pursue a dead misdemeanor on a bookkeeping violation. But the interesting thing about Cohen is how really blasé this all is. Yeah, I stole money from my client. I lied repeatedly. I violated all of these oaths. And people are just sort of nodding, and you feel like you're the only one in the room saying, this is not normal. Okay, this is not how trials are supposed to go. But the prosecutor then got up to try to resuscitate him and pound on his chest and, get his heart going again. And it made it even worse, because much of what the prosecutor talked about really didn't change the thrust of his arguments. Yeah. So at the end of the day, this is a shiny object that is being used to distract the jury from the fact that they have glaring problems. They had witnesses that said, look, we listed this as a legal expense because we paid it to a lawyer. You have the key role of Weisselberg, who's sitting 15 minutes from here, who was the one who said, yeah, why don't we treat this as a retainer? Which probably made sense to him because Cohen should have had a retainer, but he was a really bad lawyer. And so, like many things, he didn't do that. But now the prosecutors are using his failure as a basis to convict his client, and then he's adding to that and saying, I think you should send my client to jail for following my legal advice.
Based on everything you've just said, Jonathan, is it safe to assume you're in the camp of the former president not testifying or taking the stand himself?
No, he can't testify, but that door was closed by Judge Merchan. Judge Merchan granted such a broad scope for cross-examination, no lawyer would let a client get on the stand with the order of Judge Merchan. And I have to say, I was really struck today by what I consider to be fairly one-sided rulings. He hammered the defense, sustaining a lot of objections, some of which I still don't understand the basis for his order, and he was far more solicitous towards the prosecution. But the biggest problem that we saw today is one of the reversible issues. Once again, he allowed the prosecutors and Cohen to talk about how there are campaign violations in the case. And there are no campaign violations. And so after this happened again, he gave this instruction saying, disregard that on the merits. Well, they're not going to disregard that on the merits. They're hearing it over and again. So he says you can't have an expert on that issue, but Michael Cohen here is to lay out the federal election law, because that's practically what's going to happen.
And it sounds almost like you're just in disbelief as to where the prosecution has gone here.
Yep. Well, I am. I'm more in disbelief, Sandra, at the judge, frankly, because I think it's outrageous that there hasn't been a shred of evidence that Trump was even thinking about the campaign finance laws, much less, and this is what they'd have to show, that he willfully violated them. Willfulness is the highest scienter or criminal intent element in the criminal law. You basically have to show that somebody was thinking about the law, knew he had a legal obligation, and intentionally flouted it. And I don't think there's any evidence in the case that Trump was even thinking about the campaign laws. And the judge has let in that Michael Cohen pled guilty to 2 campaign finance violations, which is not, as a matter of law, admissible evidence against Trump. So they're trying to convict him of something they can't even prove that he was thinking about based on somebody else's plea of guilty that shouldn't have come in front of the jury. It's really unbelievable.
So let me roll off of a point that you just made and come back to what we talked to Alina Habba and Carrie Urban about. You mentioned guilt beyond reasonable doubt. That this isn't some like backwoods courtroom where there's a feud going on between two neighbors and did one person steal somebody's car or whatever. This is the former president of the United States. The very first time a former president of the United States has ever been hauled into court. And you talk about guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Most people don't even know what this case is really about. Why would they ever do this unless you have a slam dunk case? Why would you ever go out on this precipice?
John, I think it's because things have changed culturally. It's more of a cultural thing than a legal thing. And let me explain what I mean by that. When I was a young prosecutor here in the 1980s, if you had someone like Bragg or Letitia James who ran for office, in the federal system, they're appointed offices. In the state system, they're elected offices. If you ran to be the DA or the Attorney General saying, if you elect me, I will use the powers of our office or my office against our political enemies, that would have been disqualifying in the 1980s. Now, they win in a landslide in Manhattan and in New York. So I think this is very politically motivated, but they do feel like they're playing with the House money because this is what people voted for here.
One person that they would like to call is Brad Smith. He's a Federal Elections Commission official. And they want him to testify about the difference between a campaign contribution, campaign expense, whatever, pointing, to some degree to the potential underlying crime here, because we still don't know what it is. Yet the judge wants to put strict limitations on his testimony. Does he just want to tie the prosecution's hands behind their back here and say, go for it, but you're not going to get anywhere?
Well, with the federal election law expert, a lot of judges would probably reach that same conclusion because it is the domain of the judge to say what the law is. The problem is what this judge has done with the rest of the case. The reason they're asking to call an expert is because Merchan has made a mess of this case. I promise you that jury believes there are federal election law violations here as a fact. And Merchan has allowed that to occur, and he gives this rather weak instruction that I think, quite frankly, is not going to have much of an impact on the jury. They're not going to unhear the repeated reference to these violations. The other question is going to be Robert Costello. I thought it was very interesting that the defense spent so much time on Costello, and they specifically emphasized how Cohen asked for information to go to Giuliani. As a defense attorney, that's the type of thing I would do if I was thinking of calling Costello, because it would negate this damaging email which refers to a back channel to Giuliani. But he also nailed Cohen because Cohen said that he didn't trust Costello, didn't tell him much, and that he only spoke to Costello maybe a dozen times. He underestimated that sevenfold. You had Blanche say, you called him over 75 times. You spent 9 hours just on those telephone conversations. And it really blasted away what Cohen said previously.
So, Jonathan, based on what you just said, is there any possibility, and by the way, the former president is re-entering the...
Everybody's talking about the judge. The judge shouldn't be doing this trial. He's totally conflicted. This is the most conflicted judge probably in the history of the court system. And everyone knows what I'm talking about. Thank you very much.
Be sure to subscribe and come back to Peak. We post new tracks many times a week. And get out the vote as early as can be. We're fighting brainwashed bastards to keep our country free.
It is corrupt lawfare. It's the Biden prosecutions, and Biden, you're going to lose this election cycle.
I'm AI Donald Trump, and I approve this message. The fake news. Wake the woke, wake up America. It's not about the left or the right, but what is right and what is wrong. Tune into NewsWars.AI. I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. Be sure to get out and vote early.